Welcome to ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. I'm your host, Tigrila Gardenia, nature-inspired mentor and leadership coach. In this podcast, I share ancient and modern knowledge from biology to spirituality about the wondrous ways in which plants can help you lead a naturally conscious life. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode 55 of ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. It's me, Tigrila Gardenia, and today I want to talk to you about, practically stop running away from everything. Yep, that's it. That's today's topic. Stop running away from everything. I want to talk to you specifically about lessons that the plants give us on how to really deal with whatever it is that life hands you. I decided to use a study aid for this episode. So I pulled out my Biomimicry leadership cards. These are leadership cards that are based on life's principles. Now, you've heard me probably talk about biomimicry. So what is biomimicry? Biomimicry is a nature-inspired design strategy. It is this one here has a little chart. I didn't even remember that, of what are life's principles. So basically, biomimicry is a nature-inspired way to design either from biology to product or service, or from product or service to biology. So, and what does that mean? That means that it's by looking to nature that we can find how is it that nature does the thing that we're trying to accomplish, and then find an approach by using different organisms in nature or looking at different processes in nature and bringing those together to create what we want. In this way, specifically with a biomimetic approach, different than some other forms of bio-inspired type of design strategies, is that biomimicry really looks at the ethos. Am I creating as nature would create? Am I creating something that nature would even create? Because sometimes the most important question to ask ourselves is, just because we can, should we? We don't ask ourselves that question enough, especially in the scientific world and in some of the innovation worlds. But a biomimetic approach would ask that, would nature even create that? Because if it's outside of the canons of what is conducive to life. So the whole premise is, and if you heard me in the last episode, I was talking about why I changed my title to life coaching. This, in principle, there is a big part of it that is connected to my biomimetic background, because in biomimicry, we're always looking to create the conditions conducive to life. How do we allow life to flourish? And that's really what I want to do for you as an individual. So this episode is to take a lesson from plants on how to just stop running away. As we know, humans have these things that we think of as a huge advantage. But the more I get into the plant mind, the more I realize that this is kind of become the crux that we use for all our problems. They're called legs. Like, we have a tendency to run away from everything. We don't even realize we're doing it. Like, as human beings, we're so ingrained with the idea that I can run away, I can walk away from a problem, I can run away, that I oftentimes rely on that rather than learning how to deal with it. Now, mind you, dealing with it doesn't always mean changing it. Sometimes dealing with it means adapting. Sometimes it means forcing change. Sometimes it also means just coexisting. And I think that we think of running away as like this coexistence isn't possible, so I have to like avoid it. And really, it is true that nature does, like, plants do avoid certain things, but it's in a very different way from running away. And it's a choice, because it's a slow process. So you can't just sort of throw your hands up in the air and be like, no, I don't want to deal with that at all. So in biomimicry, we really look to how would nature move water? How does nature create shelter? How does nature teach? So whether you're looking at how does nature stay together? How does nature create glue? All of these are questions that we tend to look at from a very kind of engineering perspective. And nature has done it in really elegant ways, usually with very little ingredients and super simple rules. So when we have any kind of situation, rather than thinking about running away or trying to use a human approach, sometimes it's nice to stop, kind of quiet down. In biomimicry, we use a lot the term quiet down your cleverness and start to look at what's called life's principles. Now, life's principles, I'm going to read to you the definition because it's actually on this little card. Life's principles are operating guidelines from nature, representing the overarching patterns found amongst the species, surviving and thriving on Earth. By learning from these deep design lessons, we can model nature's innovative strategies, measure our designs against sustainable benchmarks, and be mentored using life's principles as our aspirational ideals. Throughout our leadership, we can too create conditions conducive to life. So I pulled out a few cards because I wanted to use these as examples of how we can stop running away from our problems and stop running away really from everything. And how is it that a plant, so I pulled out some plant examples of how would a plant deal with things. Now remember, plants are sessile. That means rooted in place, connected deeply to the place. So one of the first things that is different between us as humans and plants is the fact that plants are connected to their place. That means that not only are they physically located there, but they have created, can create their existence based on what that place affords us. And that's really one of the things that we don't do very well, right? One of the first cards I pulled out today was interconnected and interdependent. And in ReConnect with the Plant Kingdom, which is one of the courses that I offer inside of the Naturally Conscious community in the Blooming Sprouts membership, I have an entire module connected to interdependent and interrelated, and the idea that I'm also independent while I am interrelated. Because I think we as humans have this idea of this fierce, this desire of us to be fiercely independent. And while independence does have its advantages in certain aspects, it is important for us to recognize that we are always interdependent, because we ourselves, even as human beings, are made up of many different parts, and we need what is around us in order to survive. So one of the first things to help us not run away from everything is to truly understand our place. And place can be physical in the sense of my physical space that I live in, and that can be concentric circles coming out at different levels. So what is my place in the sense of my home? What is the city that I live in? What does it afford me? What does the country afford me? You can go from a physical location many different directions. But the more I understand what are the rules, the customs, the understandings, the traditions, all these different pieces. That doesn't mean I have to follow all of them. But if I am connected to them and I understand that I've made a choice to live in this particular place, because different than plants, where moving takes generation after generation after generation, we can do it pretty easily as human beings. So if I'm going to be living here, then I really want to understand what is it that this place affords me. And the other thing is to remember that all organisms on the planet, that includes myself and, the person that's bothering me the most in this particular moment, we all still have to coexist here, right? So in this example here, they said coexist, all organisms coexist, but some have perfected an interconnected and interdependent relationship like no other. Lichen. Does everybody know what lichen is? I love lichen. Lichen is one of my favorite organisms. So lichen you see all over the place. You probably think it's some kind of moss in some cases. You might think it's some kind of mold, but lichen is an organism all as itself. And key is usually has colors like browns and yellows and greens, and is very flat to the touch, and is an amazing indicator of good air quality. So you don't see lichen that much in so many city environments, but you do see when you go a little bit out into the outskirts, because lichen tends to be in places where there is good air quality. So lichen are a symbiosis of fungi and algae that are so intertwined that they often assume to be one organism. And so lichen is a great example of the fact that lichen, in order to be able to survive, right, in order for you have these algae that can photosynthesize, so producing food from sunlight, and you have instead all of these other fungi that have many different principles specifically around being able to break down nutrients and being able to recycle other kinds of nutrients. And so what happened is that these three, in reality, because um, it's two fungi and an algae, they discovered. And so these came together to create one new organism. And so this is one of the ways that you can stop running from things that you are avoiding, which is recognizing where is it that instead I can create cooperation? Where is it that I can instead merge in order to be? Now, I am still independent. Like, we can still identify what are the individual algae and fungi that are within a lichen, but we still see lichen as an individual being also. So it's this multi-level perspective. And so this is one of the major benefits that we could, when we create partnerships that have mutually beneficial relationships that allow us to understand where is it that I can be me and where is it instead that I am related to everything else. There's an amazing article that I reference in ReConnect with the Plant Wisdom that talks about this from the conditions of individual trees in a forest, and the fact that no two trees are really the same, even if they came from the same seed pod, in the sense of, even two oak trees that came from the same technically parents and grew up in the exact same location, one right next to another, are two individuals. And we see this in humans also with twins, right? We have twins, you have the same DNA, and yet each one is very different, and different aspects of those DNAs are turned on and off. And so one of the ways for us to recognize is that before we think about running away from something, we might ask ourselves, what would nature do to partner with this particular thing? How would it that I could leverage an interconnectedness with this other situation, person, being, any of these types of things? What would partnership look like before I just assume that it's either competition or pushing away? Right? So this is one of the ways that nature would look at how is it that I create a partnership. Let's go to another one, right? Another one of these cards says to incorporate diversity. So in this example is alpine wildflowers bloom at different times in the season. The greater the diversity of species in a meadow, the higher the chance of passing pollinators will find life-sustaining nectar throughout the summer. So this is a great example of what leads is not. One of my guiding principles around multipotentialitism, right? Having lots and lots of passions from a human perspective gets seen oftentimes as if you're scattered, as if you're kind of lost in the air, or like you just jump from thing to thing to thing. Where instead, incorporating these different passions into the way that you do things could have I just made up a word and I don't even think. Multiplying effects. That's the word I'm looking for. Multiplying effects. So if instead of looking at your passions as all these different talents, things you like to do, everybody uses different terminology in it, but ultimately are the multiple kinds of different aspects of your life. If instead of looking at them as competing for time, you were instead to incorporate them into your design, right? So whatever it is and whatever type of project I'm looking at, rather than just using one aspect of yourself, what would it look like if over the course of that development, whether we're talking about my own personality development, my self-development, or whether I'm looking at a project that I'm working on for myself, a creative project or a project I'm looking at for work, what if instead I used different aspects of myself throughout the process? So rather than running away from things that are difficult for me, what if instead I use different talents? I'll give you an example. Let's assume that you're working on a project. Actually, I'm going to use an example that's been coming up for a lot of my clients. It's tax season right now. A lot of my clients are doing taxes. And of course, because many of my clients are creatives, they do not like the idea of taxes. So what do? They have avoided their finances and dealing with their finances for a long period of time. So I was working with one of my clients and we were talking about this. And of course, when she sat down to do her taxes, she was trying to focus on it from a very rigid perspective of like number crunching type of aspects. So we went through an exercise to better understand her different passions, right? She is an art therapist. She has many different creative skills. She is somebody who likes to explore new concepts. She has many different personalities within her. So we started to list out some of these different personalities, and we started to look through them and see which personalities, are there any personalities that like numbers, which we discovered that there weren't any. So that explained why she kept avoiding the idea of number crunching, of the taxes and all that type of aspects. But she had a history and a period in her life where she did work with kind of planning and connecting to finances and stuff like that. So we were trying to figure out, well, how did that happen? How did that work in her? And as we were listing through, we started to find that there was a few personalities, one in particular, that really enjoyed the intricacies of the details of like solving problems by getting into the details, right? This was an aspect of herself. So if you're thinking about it from the perspective of a plant, right? I'm in an ecosystem and I have a whole series of different things I can do for that ecosystem. Now, when the ecosystem has lots of water or maybe the ideal conditions, I act in a specific way. So I get understood to be that kind of way. But in times of drought or in times when maybe the sun has been shaded because another tree came upon, I have the opportunity to turn on other aspects of myself. The plant has the ability to modify what are the abilities that I have within me that are inside of my genotype, and then I can express them differently based on what's happening. So we see a lot of conditions and a lot of ways behavior from plants change based on drought conditions or on sunlight and things of that nature. So that's what we did. We went back to look at a time in her life where she had done this, and we discovered that it wasn't for love of number crunching. It was for love of problem solving. So we approached it from a diverse perspective. So rather than sort of forcing her way and going through the shoulds, we ended up expanding into, I am a multi-passionate person. And I started to look at all my passions, asking which one of these passions could fit in. And the passion that she has for solving problems, like in really detailed ways, allowed her to look at her finances with a completely new optic. Not so much in the case of numbers or straight up organizational skills or other kinds of things, but to look at it more as this super fun treasure hunt of how do I solve for something particular. And this made it exciting. This made it fun. Now, all of a sudden, she could work on that and look at it from a different optics. So rather than running away from our problems, or worse, trying to like force it, incorporate diversity. Ask yourself, what are the aspects of myself? What are my different passions? What are the different personalities that I have within me? And then look to see who could solve for this. So as these wildflowers bloom in different aspects, I too can allow my talents to bloom throughout a project. I don't have to always use the same skill set. There are going to be times when I'm going to use my networking passions and talents in one moment. There's going to be another time when I'm going to use more of my creative problem solving perspectives. There are other times where I might just go off and design something and paint it or draw it or write about it. Like throughout the course of a project, don't think that when you run into a problem, you're supposed to try to solve it with the exact same problem space, the same kind of logic that you use to get yourself into it. Think about what are my complete range of passions and talents, even something you might have done, like in her case, when she was way younger, that you might be able to say, oh, wait, is that part of me still there? And can I pull that in? All right, let's go with at least one more. So I like this one. This one is leverage cyclic processes. So all habitats of the world undergo seasonal changes in moisture, temperature, or both. Rather than fight against these changes, life in each habitat leverages the cyclic processes to its advantage. Now, the reason I like this one is because I think it fits in really nicely with what we were just talking about relating to incorporating diversity. Leveraging cyclic processes means understanding that for every single aspect of myself, there is a season for that aspect. And some of these seasons rotate throughout the year. So getting to know myself, really knowing thyself, the whole esoteric mystery school adage of know thyself is really important in this, because then I start to see patterns that emerge. When is it that I do certain things much better in the summer versus when I do things in the winter? For example, I have planned my business, all of my planning and aspects. By the fall, I start to take in what I've accomplished. So rather than doing my kind of end of year planning in just the winter time or like around the new year, I actually start to gather up information about what's working and not working throughout the fall. Because from a plant perspective, the fall, especially with deciduous trees, is the time when I start to pull back in nutrients in order to prepare for the winter. Now, I don't analyze any of that in the fall season. In the fall season, what I do is start to pull back and I start to look at my various projects and I start to organize them to say, what are the lessons learned? What is it that I can, what is it that I can look at and right now and adjust? I'm trying to get an understanding of what are the things that I'm going to keep, because what are the things that have been productive for me? What are the lessons that I learned? What are the things that I can let go of? And I'm going to start to collect those in. So it's a data gathering. I take some time to really gather up data, because it is in the winter time when I start to process through that data. So by the winter time, I am not producing any new projects. I'm not starting up anywhere new. I am more likely creating my strategic planning in that winter process, so that by the apagamental days, by the time around the beginning of the year, I already have a good concept of what it is that I'm going to be thinking about for the coming year. So I've gathered up my information in the process of fall. I have gathered up my wins. I've gathered up my lessons learned. I've looked at things that are not working. I have not analyzed any of them. I'm gathering up information as objectively as possible. I'm gathering up what felt good. I'm looking at what are my experiences? Who are my new partners? I am taking time to assess, to bring in all of that information and giving space for things that don't serve me to just sort of fall away. I mean, because that's really what happens with a leaf, right? A leaf, the reason we see all these beautiful colors on a deciduous tree when the leaves start to change colors is because the tree is pulling back in all useful nutrients and is leaving behind this other forms of nutrients that are not going to serve during the winter months. And those are the ones that have those beautiful reds and those yellows. These are all different kinds of signatures that the plant has that are not going to be useful. So in this particular case, you have the opportunity to pull all that in. And then in this winter is when I evaluate it, I look through it, I use it, I map it out, I strategically think about what is, because I am no longer producing. I am not capable of producing during the winter months, especially when I live in cold climates. And then by the springtime, I'm able to start testing out my theories. I have my strategies that I've put in place, and then I start testing out my theories. And then by the summertime, I'm in full swing with whatever it is that I decided I was going to do. So this is leveraging a cyclical process. You can also do this on a monthly perspective, right? If you think about it and you start to pay attention to your body, if you start to pay attention to the people around you, to what are the rhythms that naturally come on a monthly perspective, on a weekly perspective, when you start to really take notice of your natural cycles, my mood, my productivity levels, the people around me, how do I interact with them? When are the moments that I actually want to stay by myself and I don't really want to interact with others? When is it that instead I actually want to be very out there and in the public? How does information flow with me? What are my clients or my customers doing? When I start looking at all these aspects, I don't have to run from these problems because I'm trying to do them in the wrong cycle. I can now see when is that rhythm, and I can then leverage that rhythm to my advantage. I can plan around it because, again, I am rooted. If I think of myself as rooted, I cannot change some of these cycles around me. Therefore, it's better for me to work with them rather than fighting against them. You see how that works? So, in the first one, we were talking about that you're interconnected and interdependent. And that means that I am going to be kind of subjected to these cycles from within my own body because I'm an interconnected being, but also from within the environment in which I live in. If this is a month for a lot of holidays, and I know that every year there's a certain amount of holidays, it is useless for me to try to build myself up a program where I have to give an intense amount of time to something. Or if I know that naturally I am much more creative, I don't know, around the full moon, then I wouldn't build myself time for creative projects during the new moon. You understand how this leveraging, we don't listen to our bodies enough. And that's a very different thing. When we recognize that we are nature, I don't have to run from my body or push my body. I can actually allow my body to be a part of the process and to guide the different steps that I'm going to make. I hope that was clear. I'm going to give you one more. Trying to think of which one, because I actually have two cards in my hand and I'm like, which one do I want to? Well, I'm going to use this one because I really like this one. This is recycle all materials. This says, in mature forests, one organism's waste is another's food. The ecosystem recycles all materials, creating a highly efficient and regenerative environment in which nutrient flows circulate continuously throughout the system. Now, this is one of those pieces that is very subtle from a human perspective because we have a tendency to want to throw things out. We have a tendency to run away from certain things and look at it as wasteful or bad or it's done or any of those types of things. But the natural world operates in circularity, right? So always these circles that are constantly going. So there's a lot of aspects around us, including even what we might consider to be quote unquote negative energies or difficult situations that in reality, if we were to take them as a recycling of all what is coming out of it, you could find really amazing things. For example, I was in a meeting, I'm actually in a group, and in this group, there is one person who has a logic that is completely different than my own, right? Completely different. And I love it because at first, when she would speak, it was very easy for me to go down the path that I used to have a boss that used to talk about something he called the bozo bit. The bozo bit was when you had somebody, this was in a corporate setting, and he would say, when you flip the bozo bit, it's that person that is constantly saying something that to you is absurd. It's either because it's so far off base, because it's so wrong, because it's so inappropriate or whatever. There's all these reasons. And so when he would flip the bozo bit, he would stop listening to this person. That was his default. I flipped the bozo bit. I stopped listening to this person. And it took me, I used to love this. I used to think it was really funny to flip the bozo bit and have people that you would be like, it's just them. It's just them. No, because if you go down the principle of recycle all materials, you realize how precious these people are. So this other person I was telling you about in the group, every time that she would speak, I would at first want to be like, oh my goodness, what is she going to say? Then I realized, what if I took what she was saying as output, right? As a waste product that I had to recycle. How would I recycle it? And rather than avoiding her or avoiding telling her things or avoiding, because I have to admit, there was a little inkling of me of when she would say, I can't make it to a meeting. I would be like, yes, the perfect time for the meeting. But when instead I thought about her as putting out what was to me a waste product, right? Because I didn't think I could use it. I thought of it as a waste. So, and I stopped avoiding her and instead leaned in, I would listen to what she said and I would say what could be useful from what she's saying? Can I tell you, it opened up an entire world. I am not saying I love everything that she says. What I am trying to say to you is that there is some nuggets of wisdom in there that are of a completely different logic. And sometimes they weren't even for the project that we were currently working on, right? Because recycling all of these materials doesn't necessarily mean it goes into what we were doing. So yeah, sometimes it was inappropriate or not useful to the project that we were working on. But if instead I looked at it from the greater ecosystem perspective and what we were trying to build overall, I found so many nuggets that I would have never gotten to, so many pieces of alternative logic and wisdom, and the idea that like, there is just so much out there that I wouldn't have thought of. And by listening to her, who has, completely different way of thinking and different culture and like different background than I do, I was able to pick up these pieces and then drop them into other situations. So almost like becoming a decomposer, and said, instead of trying to see what she was presenting as a whole, like I would listen to it as a whole and see if it fit into the project we were working in. And then if I couldn't find it as a whole, as the way she was presenting it, I started to deconstruct it and be like, okay, what are the elements that she's pulling from? Because they're obviously a logic that I wouldn't have ever come to. And where could this be useful, right? If the natural world uses everything because it has to go somewhere. Let me just say this. Ecosystems don't have a dump. Like we as humans just think about, I'm going to take something to the dump. I'm going to get rid of it, right? I'm going to run away from it by getting rid of it. Plants don't do that. They can't. Somebody in the ecosystem has to take it and do something with it. Otherwise, you know what? They're going to pile up a little dump in the corner of the forest. It doesn't work that way. So I started to think of myself in that way. Like, if I am going to recycle all of the materials, how do I take what this person was saying and decompose it into parts and then figure out? Now, that doesn't mean I used everything, but I learned so much from this person. Not only that, it made it so much more enjoyable, because where instead by flipping the bozo bit, I would be like, oh, why is this person talking? And then it would put you into a bad mood and it would do all these other things. Instead, by listening and decomposing it, or, deconstructing it, I could then find all the places that were useful. And it completely changed my way. So I bring these four to you as just four of, there's so many more, right? Life's Principles has so many more, but these are four really great ones. The first one we talked about, interconnected and interdependent. Remember, we can do so much when we work together. And when we recognize that everything around us affects us in some way, rather than trying to avoid that, it's much better to embrace it and to see what comes of it. That doesn't mean all of it is going to be useful. There are times where you're going to have to learn how to move it out of the way, deflect it, and such. But by allowing myself to be interconnected, I might actually create some amazing partnerships that allow me to be much more than the sum of my parts. Incorporating diversity, you are a multipotentialite. You have so much diversity. I'm not even talking about external diversity. Like, we could talk about teams and projects and all kinds of stuff. Let's just talk about your own personal multipotentialite self, your multi-passionate self. This diversity exists for a reason, and not all of your talents are going to be used at all times. So throughout the course of whatever it is that you're working on, give yourself the ability to incorporate that diversity, pull from different combinations, change from one and the other based on what is most useful to you. Leverage cyclical processes, get to know your rhythms and the rhythms of the places around you, or the things you interact with the most. When are the times that you are most excited? When are the times that you're much more introspective? What are the moments when your creativity comes? Understand when is the time that there's more availability from people or resources or such. When we start to leverage the cyclical nature of humanity, of nature itself, nature as key is always changing and moving, but there's a rhythm to many of these things. And when I start to get to know that rhythm, the rhythm of my own body, the rhythm of my environment around me, the rhythm of the projects that I'm involved with, I bet you there's going to be times where you thought you would be running away when instead you're running towards now. So definitely a great one there. And the last one is recycle all materials. Don't assume that there is anything that's just a waste product that doesn't get addressed in some ways. Everything has a use when you figure out what that appropriate use is. So give yourself permission to, if something doesn't work for you the way it's coming at you directly, give yourself permission to say, where could this be useful? Don't ask if it's useful. It's a normal question that we ask ourselves, but ask yourself more, where could this be useful? And I guarantee that if you just incorporate these 4 little things, you will stop running away from everything. What do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this conversation. Is it change the way that you think about things? As some of these questions ask, where could you leverage interconnectedness and interdependencies? How can your personal evolution, your personal leadership incorporate diversity, increasing success in a variety of conditions? How could you leverage predictable cycles? How could you lead others to recycle all the materials and optimal resources, physical as well as intellectual? Like, these are just some of the thoughts that I would love to hear from you about. You can leave me a comment, you can send me a message, or ideally you would come into the Naturally Conscious community and have this conversation with us. And so remember also, if you're here, to like, subscribe. Oh, and before I leave you, I want to leave you with one of our eco-conscious business partners, because I feel like they're going to give you something you need in order to ensure that you can best apply all of this material. Any little bit we can do to help the environment is a win in my book. That's why I'm such a fan of Who Gives a Crap, a B-certified company that donates 50% of profits to ensure everyone has access to clean water and a toilet within our lifetime. Not all of us have access to a bidet, so if you have to wipe your bum with something, this is the best toilet paper to choose. They wrap their TP in paper, not plastic, which saves tons of harmful plastic from ending up in our landfills or hurting animals. And get this, 1 box of TP can last up to a whole year. Trust me, I've tried this with my own family. They have 2 eco-friendly options, one made out of recycled sheets and other from bamboo sheets, which is super fast-growing alternative to trees. They're soft and strong and really hold up. Who Gives a Crap delivers to your door and offers 100% money-back guarantee. You can't beat that. So click on the link in the show notes to give it a go. All right, that's it. That's it for me, Tigria Gardenia. I look forward to hearing from you, and we will talk again in the next episode of ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. Thanks for listening to this episode of ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. Intro and outro music by Steve Shuley and Poinsettia from The Singing Life of Plants. So join me, Tigria Gardenia, and my plant collaborators next time on ReConnect with Plant Wisdom.